All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first quarter meeting of the New York State Fire Prevention and Building Code Council. Today we have, not to my immediate left, but to my far left, we have Heather Roth. She is
just signed
designee of the new State Fire Administrator. Francis Nearney. To my right, we've seen him before, and he's stepping in again. Thomas Lucchese is going to step in for designate for Mayor Judy Kennedy.
Court Street. Oh, I forgot my name.
Buffalo, you're live. We can hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. First, we'll call the roll so we have a quorum.
Okay. Matt Tebow, designee for Secretary Rosado.
Here.
Heather Roth, designee for State Fire Administrator.
Here.
Michael Weber, designee for Commissioner Jamie Rubin, DHCR.
I'm Joe Palazzolo. I'm the designee for Commissioner Rubin in New York.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Thank you.
Closer.
Vince Rappuccillo, Commissioner Reardon, designee.
Here.
Keith Wynn, designee for Honorable Bill de Blasio.
Here.
Michael Sabatino.
Here.
Thomas Lucchese, designee for Honorable Judith Kennedy.
Here.
Honorable Barbara Rice. William Tucker. Honorable William
Here.
Tucker.
Here.
Sean Hamlin.
Here.
John Flanagan.
Here.
William Tyne.
Here.
Dominic Marinelli.
He is here. He just stepped out for a moment in Buffalo.
Tim DeRusher.
Yes, here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, quorum is present. We can conduct business today. We have a relatively crowded agenda today. We're going to be taking up final adoption of the Sugar House regulations. We're going to be going through the Uniform Code supplement. We're going to be making technical changes to the Energy Code in order to match up with the supplement and the 2016 code, Uniform Code, and we're going to be discussing parking structure, evaluations of parking structures. I don't know if an action is going to be necessary there, but we definitely want to get the Code Council's feelings on it. We're going to be visited today by Assemblywoman Donna Lupardo and New York State Senator Tom O'Mara. They're going to speak briefly on that topic when we get to it. I note that Barbara Rice just walked in, so we can add her to the quorum. Okay. Moving to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of December 9th, 2016, our fourth quarter meeting from last year. Happy New Year, everyone, by the way. On the minutes, we take a voice vote, right? Okay. The minutes were included in your packet. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, we'll take it up as a voice vote. All in favor of adopting the minutes of December 9th, 2016, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
I'll abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay, the minutes are adopted with an abstention by Honorable Barbara Rice. All right. Questions with agenda item 4, just we still have a few for 1. Take up 3. All right, we'll move to agenda item 3. This is the adoption of the Sugar House Alternative Activity Provisions. I'm just going to have get up briefly and talk about, we had a rather long public comment period and a hearing. just gonna have Nick give us a very quick overview of what we got back during the comment period and during the hearing, and then we'll take up the vote on the adoption. Go ahead, Nick.
Good morning. The public comment period for the Sugar House ended on January 17th. We received a total of 15 public comments. All were positive. We have not received any constructive criticism or negative feedback from anyone anywhere. It seemed like everyone generally agreed, I'm assuming, with what the co-counsel had proposed. So we're asking you today to, if you're willing, to adopt it, and if you would make it effective immediately upon posting in the in the state register. At that point, it will be effective on February 8th of this year. Aside from that, there's no real news on the subject.
Thank you, Nick. All right, so this was the proposal that was created in, the revised proposal was created in October. We all, as a council, I want to thank everyone. Everyone worked hard, and we had a lot of input from the council, and so we're at the end, and today is the day. Do we adopt or do we not? So I'm going to ask Mr. Flanagan to read a rather lengthy motion, so bear with us. Actually, two rather lengthy motions, but we'll start with the first. John.
I move that the Code Council find and determine that the amendment to the State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, the Uniform Code, to be implemented by the adoption of the rule identified in Agenda Item 3, 19 NYCRR Part 1228, Sugar House Alternative Activity Provision, will not have any significant environmental impact and will not have a significant adverse effect on any significant fish or wildlife habitat, scenic resources of the statewide significance, important agricultural land, or area included in the approved local waterfront revitalization program, and two, that Gerard Hathaway be authorized to sign and deliver with respect to such rule adoption. 1. The State Environmental Quality Review Short Environmental Assessment Form. 2. The State Environmental Quality Review Negative Declaration. 3. The New York State Department of State Coastal Management Program Coastal Assessment Form. And 4. The Certificate of No Significant Coastal Impact. So moved.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Barbara Rice. Gerard, if you will, you'll go.
Do we need?
That's true. Do we have any discussion on the adoption? Okay, hearing none. Gerard, why don't you go ahead and call the roll?
Matt Pemo.
Yes.
Heather Roth.
Yes.
Joseph Palazola.
Yes.
Vince Rappuccillo.
Yes.
Keith Wen.
Yes.
Michael Sabatino.
Yes.
Thomas Luchesi.
Yes.
Barbara Rice.
Yes.
William Tucker.
Yes.
Sean Hamlin.
Yes.
Tim DeRusher.
Yes.
John Flanagan.
Yes.
William Tyne.
Yes.
Dominic Carnelli.
Yes.
It's
The motion
adopted.
is, for
Motion
passage.
is adopted unanimously. Second motion, Mr. Flanagan.
Yes, sir. A rule to amend the Uniform Code by adding a new Part 1228 entitled Sugar House and Alternative Activity Provisions to 19 NYCRR was proposed by notice of proposed rulemaking published in the State Register on November 16, 2016. I move that 1. The Code Council find and determine that making the amendment to the Uniform Code to be made by this rule effective immediately upon the publication of the notice of adoption of the State Register is necessary to protect the health, safety, and security because this amendment will add provisions to the Uniform Code that will enhance the health, safety, and security of owner-operators and employees of Sugar House that are used for activities which are not normally conducted as a Sugar House and which support the maple product industry, such as product sampling, pancake breakfast, educational tours and activities, and the marketing and sale of merchandise, and the health and safety and security of members of the public who participate in these activities. Those activities are frequently conducted during the Maple Weekends, which typically occur in March of each year, and making this amendment effective immediately upon the publication of the notice of adoption, rather than 90 days after such publication, will ensure that the provisions to be added to the Uniform Code by this rule will be effective prior to this year's Maple Weekend. 2, that the rule to amend the Uniform Code by adding a new part of 1228 entitled Sugar House Alternative Activity Provisions to 19 NYCRR be approved and adopted. And 3, that the rule to amend the Uniform Code by adding a new part 1228 entitled Sugar House Alternative Activity Provisions to 19 NYCIR be effective on the date this notice of adoption of the rule is published in the State Register. So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Do I have a second? Mr. Hamlin seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Call the roll.
Matt Tebow,
Yes?
Heather Voss,
Yes.
Joseph Bozo,
Yes.
Vincent Rappachulo,
Yes.
Keith Wen,
Yes.
Michael Sabatino,
Yes.
Thomas Wuchesi,
Yes.
Barbara Rice,
Yes.
William Tucker,
Yes.
Sean Hamlin,
Yes.
Tim Ferruccia,
Yes.
John Flanagan,
Yes.
William Tyne,
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
Is unanimous?
Okay. The Sugar House Alternative Activity piece is unanimously adopted. I want to thank again everyone for their hard work on this. I do feel that we have created a safer situation in these facilities. Thank you all. Okay, moving to agenda item 4, 19 NYCRR parts 1219 through 1228, Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. We're looking at a potential notice of proposed rulemaking, and this will be for the supplement. Today, I think the best way to handle this, since we do have our thick supplements in our packet, is probably just to have Nick and Miriam and perhaps others, Joe and others, brief us on some of the important pieces in there, some of the significant change pieces, and we'll go from there. Let's see, first up. Why don't we do water efficiency standards first, and I'll call on Miriam to come up and walk us through some of the answers to the questions that the council had last time, and just give a brief summary of where we're at. Miriam. Also, you all had a memorandum in your packets on this.
I put together a memo for you to answer the questions that came up at the last meeting. Sorry for the length. I tried to squeeze it down to one page and it didn't work. I think I addressed the questions that came up. One, what is the cost difference? We looked at several different sources, consumer reports. I went on different Home Depot, Walmart, the Lowe's, and looked at the price of toilets and shower heads and faucets that meet the different, the current standard and the WaterSense standard. And I did not find a difference. Those entities did not find a difference either. In some cases, if people do have low pressure, they can, you know, by have an added cost to adjust the pressure, but that can happen if you have 20 PSI at the building, whether you have low flow fixtures or not. And the other issue was, what's the cost to municipalities, or cost or benefit to municipalities? The cost to municipalities could occur if there were more blockages in the sewers. Looked at a lot of different references to find out if areas that have high levels of high efficiency toilets have any increase in blockages, and there was no increase in blockages looking at the references that are in the memo. There were a lot of benefits and costs to municipalities. We looked at the benefits of costs and benefits to individuals and found that a home could save over $100 a year by having low efficiency toilets, and that based on saving on heating water and saving on pumping water or on sewer and water. I'm not going to go through the whole memo because it's long. I know you. I hope you had a chance to look at it. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions on the water sense provisions?
This is Bill Tyne in Buffalo.
Okay,
I just wanted to thank Miriam for looking into this for us.
Thank you, Miriam. Tim?
I know I asked this question before, just two questions. I know this hasn't gone through the ICC process. It's been proposed, but it so far has not been adopted, is that right?
Yeah, ICC said they, in their commentary or their reason statement, that they would like to leave this to local municipalities, or local, the states and
Okay, and the second question, does this potentially reduce the size of piping inside of a residence, specifically one or two family, because of a lower flow? Would that allow smaller pipes inside of a building that would then restrict, sort of like the old days when everybody had a small half-inch pipe going into their house and you got what you got kind of thing? Was there any look at that?
There was.
Specific item?
There was. If you go into, I attached a sheet of references if you want to look in it further, but basically to summarize what those PERC, the Plumbing Efficiency Council, I forgot what the R stands for, and the studies from New Zealand and also Canada all came to the same conclusion. You could shrink the size of the pipes, go from 4 inch to 3 inches, and have greater, material would carry further, but the material carried well at 4 inches. There's no need to shrink the size.
Okay, I was thinking more on the supply side, the water supply, the potable water system piping. I just wondered if that's are we going to see a reduction in that type of piping or tubing that's used because of the lower flow fixtures?
There is no, the low flow fixtures have been installed in a lot of areas and using the existing water supply sizes. I mean, the water sense fixtures reduce the flow by on the order of 20%, and there is no need to reduce the pipe, or there hasn't been a practice of reducing the pipe. I'm kind of talking on the fly now because I haven't heard the question before, but I do know the reduction in flow is about 20% for those fixtures, and there hasn't been a corresponding reduction in pipe sizes to the homes.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Are there any other questions or comments on the water sense provisions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next provision. We'll be taking a conceptual approval vote at the end, so we don't need to do it for each one of these. Next up is flood elevation language. I think Nick's got that one.
The IBC and IRC flood language was discussed at the last meeting. We had some comments, I guess, from our original people, from DEC, and I believe from a co-council member, about the design flood elevation and the general freeboard requirement. So we went back and we rehashed the IBC and the IRC language that we amended. And notice in the supplement there's a lot of red text in here. It's not that bad. A lot of this is just being moved around into different code sections. The only real change that we actually added was the section, in the IBC that is, the section on the 500-year flood requirement. We put a little zinger in there at the request, I believe, of Keith Wen, such that that design flood elevation freeboard requirement wouldn't be missed as it applies to healthcare facilities in flood zones. So that's something that's really been added, that's new. The other provisions are just, seems to be just clarifications of what we had in the supplement and just moving them around to different code sections. The IRC, again, you're not going to have a healthcare facility in the IRC, but we do have one additional zinger about the application of ASC 24. There was a provision in ASCE that allowed you to use ASC 24 in lieu of all of the other provisions in ASCE 322. We wanted to make sure that the freeboard requirement wasn't missed, so we just took the freeboard requirement and restated it in the existing IRC language. So that was one of the bigger changes, but everything else, it's really not that different, just clarification of what we have proposed in the past. There is, I guess, one additional clarification I should probably mention. It was under 322.1.4, establishing design flood elevations. It was, I guess we should have done this last year. We have a footnote G in table 301.21 that we amended. We took New York State's flood requirements and forced it into the IRC table. I guess this should have been coordinated last year with what we had done. At that point, the IRC and the IBC would be identical. Well, they are right now as it is. It's just this is a clarification of what we had done. That's really it for the flood provisions.
Okay. Questions? Are there any questions, comments, discussion? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Nick. Nick, why don't you stay up there and we'll just keep working through some of yours.
Sure.
Solid fuel burning, heating appliances, chimneys, and flues. I think this is one we haven't done by the council yet, so.
Yes, this is a new one. This is a requisite of executive law, 378.5C. Executive law has requirements for the inspection, installation, so on and so forth of these devices. It's a statutory requirement. Really can't get away from it. So we have some new provisions in the code to address it. This is a whole new section, 109. There are 3 additional provisions in the supplement in the IRC, fuel gas code, and I believe the mechanical code that point you also to 109, so there's no way you can possibly miss it. This is somewhat similar to what we had done in the 2010 codes. Before we had those 3 zingers, we did not have the 109, so this 109 seems to really bring it all together and hit all the bases of the executive law. Questions?
Are there any questions and comments? Okay, hearing none. Nick, I got one more for you, I think. Off-street parking lots?
Yes, again, this was discussed at the last co-council meeting. We had some comments from the public about the new provisions when we adopted the 2016 codes, 2016 supplement, and 2015 I codes. One of the provisions for accessible striping had been removed from the code. It's when parking lots are repaved or repainted that have accessible spaces, or if you create accessible spaces. Basically, if you have an existing parking lot and you repave or restripe or reconfigure, it seemed that the public wants us to put that provision back to make sure that you have accessible spaces, that we're not going to make parking lots less accessible. So we had taken the 2010 language and essentially forced it back into the supplement. this is, I think, the first time you're seeing this. This was discussed at the last meeting, and obviously it's part of the old code, so you may or may not be familiar with it. We're looking for approval to put this back in and keep parking lots accessible.
Any questions, comments, discussion on this piece? No? Okay. All right, Nick. I guess that's what I have for you. Moving quickly today. All right, Joe, building permits, applications for building permits, construction inspections, stop work orders, certificates of occupancy, and operating permits.
Yes, this is, excuse me, a variation on a proposal that I discussed at the last meeting. At the last meeting, we had proposed this as a standalone provision that we might adopt separately from the overall update to the Uniform Code. And I think we now have a consensus among the Department of State folks that it's best just to include this in the supplement itself. Basically, what we are adding to the Uniform Code itself a requirement that regulated parties obtain a building permit before they build or renovate a building, that they include certain material in their application for a building permit, that they facilitate construction permits by leaving work open until the inspections are done. I say facilitate construction inspections by leaving work open until the inspections are performed, that they obtain certificates of occupancy before they occupy a newly built or renovated building, or before they use a building for a new use or occupancy, and that they obey stop work orders if the authority having jurisdiction issues them. We would propose also to include in these provisions, language that would say that the building permits, the applications for permits, etc., would be in accordance with the authority having jurisdiction, the code enforcement program adopted by the authority having jurisdiction, or in accordance with the minimum standards established by the Department of State Regulation, whichever is stricter. So we allow the local governments to adopt stricter standards if they wish. If for some reason they have not adopted the standards required by the Department of State Regulations, this provision in the Uniform Code would more or less fill in the gap, say to regulated parties, you have to comply with the stricter of the two. Also, by including these provisions in the Uniform Code, violation of the Uniform Code is itself subject to penalties prescribed in the executive law. And this would allow an authority having jurisdiction that does not have a penalty for violating their own local law to impose a penalty, making these requirements a little more meaningful. So we feel including these provisions in the Uniform Code itself makes them more meaningfully enforceable, and it adds a level of uniformity to these enforcement provisions across the state. And it also happens to coincide with what the IRC and the International Building Code provide. They include these provisions in those codes themselves. We have not, up until now, included them in our versions of these codes. This will put them in.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have any questions, comments, or discussion on this piece? I'm quiet in the right room today. It was well done. Well done.
It was all the explanation.
It really was. We're on fire today. Okay. That is all of the highlights I have. Do we have, you all got this in your packet yesterday before we on conceptual approval to put forth proposed regulations? Does anyone have any questions, comments, or discussion on any other piece that is going to be part of this? Tom?
Has not been addressed. I found this last meeting. In the Fire Code, Section 503, both the 05 and 07 and the 10 New York State Fire Code reference Appendix D. Appendix D was adopted as the only appendix to the fire code for the 2015. But in the 2015 International Code, there's no way to get from Section 503 to Appendix D as far as the design of the fire apparatus access roads. I'm not sure if that's an oversight, or if that should be looked at for clarification.
Nick is.
I think I got this one.
All right, Nick's jumped through the book. Let's give him a second.
Yeah, I want to take a quick look at 503, but to the best of my knowledge, the body of the IFC is, anywhere in the body, to the best of my knowledge, anywhere in the IFC, the body of the text, I don't think it says anywhere Appendix D. I believe it's fire apparatus access road. So you would have to know that we adopted first the Appendix D, which is fire apparatus access road, and then anywhere in the code, like 503, it talks about fire apparatus access road. Then at that point, you would have to intuitively know to go to Appendix D. Again, I just want to doubly confirm, yeah, all three apparatus access, yeah. So yes, you just have to know. You have to start at the beginning of the cycle and read through it to know that Appendix D was adopted, and wherever it talks about fire apparatus access and anywhere in this document, then you know to employ it.
Is that spelled out anywhere in the code, in the supplement?
Well, I think if you were to search the electronic version of the IFC for Appendix D, I think you're going to find it in the index and the table of contents. I don't think it's anywhere in the actual meat and potatoes of the book. Yeah, that's what I mean. So you would have to know that Appendix D is apparatus access roads, and that it has been adopted. So wherever you see it in here, you would know at that point to go to the appendix. This could be a good technical bulletin, because this is not a mistake. We did not overlook this, the ICC did not overlook this, because the appendices and all the I-codes, they're up for adoption if we want to. They're up for grabs. So it's not like that was something that was a mistake or overlook. That was the intent. So it's not a great way of doing things, but that's the way it is. This could be a technical bulletin, because we have had questions on this in the past. We did adopt Appendix D, but again, nowhere in here, this part of it, does it say D. No, yeah, you're not going to find that.
But the application is there, right?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe technical bulletin.
It could be.
Joe?
I'm going way out on a limb here, not discuss this with anyone. We could add a section to the supplement that would make that clear.
We could, in Chapter 7 of the supplement, such as what was done for 7.2 for operational permits, for clarification.
Yes.
If that's the will of the council.
Yes. Why don't we take a look at that?
Yeah, actually, that would just be an amendment, wouldn't it? That wouldn't be, because it's already adopted, that'd be a clarification.
Adding something to the draft supplement you have here will add a provision that's.
I mean, what really changed? It doesn't really change anything, yes. Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Good. Are there any other questions, comments, discussion? Tim?
On the supplement, the general items here? I know we talked, this is regards to section residential code 313, and I've been talking with the Department of State staff to try to figure out what's the best way to go through and include the definition which was in the previous edition of the code for definition of grade plane, because that has in fact changed. And depending on which side of the aisle you're looking at, whether or not you're for sprinklers or against sprinklers, in the simplest terms, it makes a lot of difference, because there's a third test that talks about more than 50% of the perimeter of the building being 6 feet or more. And in some cases, there are situations underneath the new 2015 IRC language, 1 and 2 family homes, and in fact townhouses would not require sprinkler systems when you use those current standards in the definition. Underneath the old 2010 previous editions of the IRC, it would have required sprinkler protection in those structures that were classified as 3 stories. So I would urge us to figure out a way to amend definition or someplace specific only to the residential sprinkler issue to bring in that third criteria rather than the 2015 code. And I would actually open that up to suggestions before I made it a motion, because we've been talking about it, but timing has been the issue here, so.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. We do still require sprinkler systems in buildings that are above 2 stories, that are 3 or more stories. But the trigger is the situation, and with the new definition for story above grade plane and the way that trigger works in R313, which is the requirement for sprinkler systems, there ends up being a difference. I wanted to quickly go through some of the relevant definitions that go with this. Are the definition of basement itself, which has changed. It now says basement story that is not a story above grade plane. Then it sends you to the story above grade plane definition, where it used to be under 2010 code, basement, that portion of a building that is partially or completely below grade, but it still sent you to the story above grade definition, which has changed. So the basement definition was changed, seemed to be meant clearly to identify the basement as a story. However, it's a story that's not considered a story above grade plane when compared to that definition. So that was an attempt to make that clearer. Looks like they've been working on that in the codes for a while. And then there's the term grade, and the term grade is the finished ground level adjoining a building at all exterior walls. That hasn't changed since our last code. The actual definition of grade plane, should I read the whole thing? It's really, that hasn't changed since the last code, the actual definition of grade plane. It's a reference plane representing the average of the finished ground level adjoining the building at all exterior walls. Where the finished ground level slopes away from exterior walls, the reference plane shall be established by the lowest points within the area between the building and the lot line, or when the lot line is more than 6 feet from the building between the structure and a point 6 feet from the building. And the definitions for story itself has not changed. That portion of the building included between the upper surface of the floor and the upper surface of the floor next above. Then we have the story above grade plane definitions. The current definition has a little bit different language in the body of the definition, and it's more to make it consistent with the changes in calling things out using the term grade plane that's in the building code and really has been in, that term has been in our code since 2010, just not used in the same way. So the biggest thing is it identifies only 2 tests for whether a building is a story or a lowest level is a story above grade plane. One is that it's more than 6 feet above grade plane. If it's more than 6 feet above grade plane, which is an average of the grade around the building, it's considered a story above grade. And any time there's a area of the building that's more than 12 feet above finished ground at any point. Where the previous code identified it as story above grade, and the definition was a little shorter. The grade plane was added in 2015. It wasn't there. But again, the body of the definition is saying that any story that's completely above grade is a story above grade plane. And then it goes back into, except that a basement shall be considered a story above grade plane, where the finished surface of the floor above the basement is. So again, there's these same there are 3 tests there. One is the more than 6 feet above the grade plane, which is an average. The last one is the same, which is more than 12 feet above finished ground at any point. And the middle one is the one that Tim is interested in restoring. And that one says that that floor above is more than 6 feet above the finished ground level for more than 50% of the building. So if there's a portion of the building that's below, more than 6 feet below that floor above, then that's considered in the 50% that's more than that. And then there are parts of the building that are less than 6 feet below, 6 feet or less below. Those are considered on the other half of that 50-50 equation. And when you use that, what it does is it takes some kind of extreme cases where people use retaining walls and things to try to have more of that lower level exposed so they can use it for windows and things to, it would limit that to just 50% of the building. Where if you don't have that rule in the current situation, there are cases in where you could have a basement that under the old code would have been considered a story above grade. Therefore, if that created a building that was more than 2 stories above grade, it would be sprinklered. Where if you don't consider that story a story above grade yet, even though it's a little more exposed, it wouldn't require that sprinkler system even if there's 2 stories above. So it's more how much of that basement level is exposed to a lower level and how much has the higher level. And so there is a difference, and the term plane, was added to coordinate with language in the building code definition. And actually the 2010 building code read pretty much like our new language now. It doesn't have that 50% test. So buildings under the building code, commercial buildings, commercial residential buildings such as apartment houses, dormitories, those buildings have been built for 6+ years using the definition that's similar to the one we have currently. Of course, in the building code, a residential building gets sprinklered, there's no test. Residential building gets sprinklered. In the residential code, not all residential buildings get sprinklered until they're considered more than 2 stories above grade plane. So what we have here is a situation where it is different than before, and in some cases, there will be buildings that would have got bumped into needing sprinklers that wouldn't under the new 2015 definition, and then in the 2010 code. So, I look at it this way. So going forward, what do we do? I already mentioned that considering that all not 1 and 2 family dwellings are not necessarily going to get a sprinkler system unless that lower level, is considered a story above grade. That won't be added into the mix. And I'm looking at a couple of options here. There may be more, but certainly the first option is to leave it as is. In some cases, not having the 50% requirement will allow the lowest level of 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses to have a larger percentage of building perimeter to be above the finished ground level before it's considered a story above grade plane. And the second option would be to try to take the language and put it back in there and have that third option again, which if that were put back in all cases, the lowest level of 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhouses will have the same percentage of a building perimeter allowed to be above finished ground level before considered a story above grade plane as it was allowed in 2010. And so in general, we've tried to stick with less New Yorkisms, and we've moved more toward what the ICC codes have. This is a situation where we've done that. There's been some concern about an amount of buildings, I don't know how many it would be, that might not require a sprinkler system where if it was a little higher out of the ground, or it would. And The final thing is, I know one of Tim's questions was, if we were, as the code council were to approve putting that language back in, he believed that other terms where grade plane was referenced might need to come out of there because they say grade plane. But when I look at that rule, I don't believe that's so. I think if they're added, if the 50% rule were added back, then the term plane would not have to be removed, because the three tests that are in there clearly are qualifiers to the body of the definition. So if one of the items is true, any one of the items is true, that you're more than 6 feet above grade plane, you're more than 6 feet above the finished ground level for more than 50% of the building, or more than 12 feet at any point, you would have to sprinkler the building. So regardless that the name of the section, the defined term is story above grade plane, the test would, do the work and push it up into that level. So in general, I don't think leaving the term plane, which is used throughout the codes, throughout the supplement, throughout the uniform or the energy code, the residential code and the building code, I believe fooling with that would be very difficult to make sure you weren't changing some other link. And that's my take on it. I tend to lean toward not sticking more with ICC because that's what we've been trying to do. I can understand the concern that a certain percentage of buildings may not get sprinkler systems that would have gotten sprinkler systems under the old rule. But that's the way it has been in the building code for 6+ years.
So to simplify.
You can do that?
I think it's important to use the same language, use the term grade plane. The question right here is really, the old definition had 3 requirements. The new definition has 2. When we take the third definition, the third criteria out, it changes, in some cases, not all, it changes whether or not a 1 or 2 family dwelling or townhouses will receive fire sprinkler protection. I'm very much a proponent of using what the ICC language provides. This body voted to retain the same 3-story requirement that was in the code from 2010. With that already being on the table and present, I'm proposing, and I'll make a motion, that we add the third definition, the third criteria of the 2010 definition back into the 2015 I-Code definition for purposes of residential sprinkler triggers in New York State. And it's purely to remain consistent from what we had from before. And I would make that as a motion and open it enough if there was another way that staff thought it would work the same way rather than changing the definition, that's fine. But I think we need to deal with this and remain consistent from what we said we were going to do from quite a while ago, and not change it now. Okay.
We have looked at other ways of inserting that in there, but they were much messier than just putting this back in the definition, if you're intending to do that.
Okay, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Flanagan. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Bill Tyne in Buffalo.
Hey, Bill, go ahead.
Hi. As it was described to us a few moments ago, I think I would object to it. We went through a lot of effort, particularly with regard to sprinklers, to make sure that we were, one, remaining, and with respect to the overall code, that we were putting in place a code that's consistent across as many jurisdictions as possible, so that people that are building know what the rules are without having to sort through and sift and find unique features within it. That said, the whole purpose of the council is to make sure we're looking out for the interests of New York, the unique characteristics of New York, looking out for being compliant with New York State law. And one of the fundamental issues we discussed with respect to sprinklers was that we were desirous of not being different than all of the surrounding states around New York, recognizing that there were only 2 in the union that had different standards with respect to sprinklers. This would take us and put us to be less consistent with what we've already done. So I think we want to remain a state that's competitive. We have a number of other elements within the code. We just talked about Section D a little while ago, which is full of new amendments that talk about fire accessibility and access roads and the requirement for sprinklers if access is to be pushed to the limit. So I think that I would certainly be opposed to this.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else?
I'd like to respond to a question.
Go ahead.
We've already changed Section 313 from the ICC code. That was already done and changed the entire section from what it was originally in the ICC language. So there's an issue here fundamentally that it was very clearly stated to comply and keep the same requirements as it was before, which is what that language tried to indicate and tried to say. But with a new definition after using it for a short period of time, there's an inconsistency that needs to be corrected. Just like all of the other amendments, that's why we're changing those small little sections throughout the supplement. That's what the supplement is for. So I would urge everyone to add that back in to remain consistent from what we had previously in the New York Code, which is not substantially different than anything else that's happened around in this state as of today.
Are there any other questions or comments? Discussion. Gerard, you're good?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Wen.
Yeah, I guess my question is this the result of, is this an unintended consequence of the changes to the definition? Because I think there's a difference if it was contemplated that it should be this way, that some of the 1 and 2 family buildings should be covered by the changes versus, if this is just a simple adoption of the IRC and as a consequence, these buildings are now covered, but that's not what we voted on previously, right? I thought what we voted on before was to maintain the New York State status quo. So I just want to know if this is an unintended consequence of the change in the definition.
I believe it was an unintended consequence. It was the ICC changed the definition to be more consistent with the building code, where at least to us, it wasn't raised. It might have been something that was raised in the past, and I think they were looking to be more consistent with the building code. Of course, in the ICC, sprinklers are required in all residential buildings.
It was discussed in the residential technical subcommittee. Tim was on that committee as well, so that people in that committee were aware of it. The sprinkler issue was still up in the air at that time.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, is there anyone else? Before I restate the motion I think that has been made, and if I'm wrong, Tim will jump in. But is there anybody else? Okay, so the motion that's on the table right now is to add back in the second criteria that was in the 2010 code, more than 6 feet, 1,829 millimeters, above the finished ground level for more than 50% of the total building perimeter. And that's gonna be added back into the definition of grade plane, correct?
Story above grade plane.
Or, Tim said, a similar change that could be made by staff as we prepare to put this in as a proposal. Do I have that right, Tim?
Correct.
And it's been seconded by Mr. Flanagan. Discussion seems to be exhausted, so it is time to vote on this motion to add this in. We do that right, Council? Excellent. Every now and then I get one right.
So the motion by, second by Mr. Flanagan. Okay. Matt Pebo.
Given the broadness, I'll vote yes.
Heather Roth.
Yes.
Joseph Palazzolo.
Yes.
Vince Rappuccillo.
Yes.
Keith Wen.
Yes.
Michael Sabatino.
Yes.
Thomas Lucchesi.
Yes.
Barbara Rice.
Yes.
William Tucker.
No.
Sean Hamlin.
No.
Tim DeRusha.
Yes.
John Flanagan.
Yes.
William Tyne.
No.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
11 yes, 3 no's. The motion passes.
Motion is adopted, so we're going to instruct staff as they move forward with the Uniform Code supplement to either put in the second piece that I read earlier or to find a similar conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Tim. All right, moving back. Is there any more discussion on any other piece of the supplement before we move forward to a conceptual approval vote? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to ask council the potential motion here so that we get it right.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but
You're going to do better than me, Joe. So.
I suggest that we ask for conceptual approval to complete the rulemaking documents, to modify the supplement as discussed here today, finalize the rulemaking package submitted to the governor's office and the regulatory review for their approval, file a notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay, will anybody make such a motion? Mr. Flanagan, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. DeRusha. Okay, if Gerard's ready, we'll take the vote on conceptual.
Sorry, the motion itself was from
Mr. Flanagan. Seconded by Tim. Okay. You're ready, you can take that vote on conceptual approval.
Matt Pebo.
Yes.
Heather Roth.
Yes.
Joseph Palazzolo.
Yes.
Vincent Rappuccillo.
Yes.
Keith Wen.
Yes.
Michael Sabatino.
Yes.
Thomas Lucchesi.
Yes.
Barbara Rice.
Yes.
William Tucker.
Yes.
Sean Hamlin.
Yes.
Tim DeRusha.
Yes.
John Flanagan.
Yes.
William Tyne.
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
Very good. That's
Motion carries unanimously.
Carries unanimous.
Okay, so the division is so instructed to move forward with the supplement with the addition and passed on motion. With luck, we will see this again for an adoption vote at our next meeting, which is actually about 5 months away, so it gives plenty of time to get through the SAPA process. Okay, Moving on to agenda 5. This is pretty technical, but I guess we'll just have Miriam come up and tell me that it's technical, and then we can move on. Miriam, do you just want to describe what we're doing? This is 19 NYCRR Part 1240, State Energy Conservation Construction Code, and a notice of proposed rulemaking. Again, we'll be taking a conceptual vote.
This is really to adjust the energy code supplement so that it refers to the new uniform code supplement, and that's basically it. We wherever the energy code supplement says uniform code, right now it says the specific edition from 2016. We're going to say 2017.
Okay.
And that's it.
Thank you, Miriam. Technical like I thought. Okay. Pretty easy. Is there any discussion on this? I didn't think so. Okay. So, Joe, you want to do that motion again for me? Because, you know, I barely went.
Now that I practice, I think we'd like conceptual approval of adopting, or, I'm sorry, creating rulemaking documents necessary to amend the energy code in a manner to cause references in the existing energy code and energy code supplement to be changed from references to the 2016 Uniform Code Supplement to the brand new and improved 2017 Uniform Code Supplement. To send those rulemaking documents to the governor's office and the RRU for their approval, and then to file a notice of proposed rule.
Joe? Yes. All right, Mr. Flanagan makes that motion. Is there a second? Mr. Lucchese seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Fire away.
Matt Tebow.
Yes.
Heather Roth.
Yes.
Michael Weber.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph Blow.
Yes.
I have names that have been crossed out and then re-put back on. Vincent Rappiolo. Yes. Keith Wen.
Yes.
Michael Sabatino.
Yes.
Thomas Lucchese.
Yes.
Barbara Rice.
Yes.
William Tucker.
Yes.
Sean Hanlon.
Yes.
Tim DeRusha.
Yes.
John Flanagan.
Yes.
William Tyne.
Yes.
Dominic Granelli.
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you, Gerard. All right, we're on to agenda item 6. Do not see our legislators, so we'll first have, this is you, Nick, not you. This is Brian. Oh,
Brian.
Perfect time. Great. Brian, why don't you come up
Bring
and
in higher down.
introduce the topic. This is standards for structural integrity, evaluation of parking structures. I'm going to have Brian give, like I said, a brief introduction, and I'm going to ask our legislators to come up and speak on it. Basically, what we're looking for here is what the council thinks about the proposal. I'm going to talk about it, so I'll explain why the council won't necessarily have to take action today. Go ahead, Brian.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here to just introduce to you call it a modified rule that would be added to the department regulations for the minimum standards of code enforcement. If you're not a local code official, you may not be familiar with 19 NYCRR Part 1203, which sets forth minimum features, minimum standards for a code enforcement program. What we're looking at doing is enhancing Section 1203.3, and I'll put it this way: we're going to specify a minimum standard that would require structural integrity evaluations be conducted on parking garages. Currently, you might ask, well, are parking garages part of the minimum standards today? Are they included in the buildings that are mentioned in 1203? The answer is yes. In 1203.3H, there's currently provisions for fire safety and property maintenance inspections. And yes, parking garages would be included. in that current language that exists today, and today, within 3 years, a code official should inspect a parking garage structure, whether it's a standalone structure or if it's part of a building like the building we're in today. What we want to do is enhance the language for the parking structure features. And that's what I'm going to walk through a little bit. We're going to have a few exceptions. Obviously, slab on grade parking lots would not be included in this enhanced rule. We would not include garages that are attached or accessory to a 1 or 2 family dwelling or townhouse. And in looking at the rules overall, we're looking at excluding parking garages that are 1 story above grade or 1 level above grade and that are less than 2,500 square feet in area. Okay. To give you a perspective on that, that's probably a parking garage structure with less than 10 parking spaces on it. Okay. That same structure would still be required to be inspected on at least a 3-year cycle as part of the property maintenance and fire code inspections. Okay. So it's not like the building would never be inspected by a local official. I don't want to steal the thunder of the other speakers. They can define the need. But back in 2015 in the summer, there was a parking garage collapse in Johnson City, and I believe there was 1 or 2 other parking structures in that region that were flagged as potentially being dangerous. And it's one of the motivations for carrying forward this rule. Basically, the rule is going to hinge on a definition known as deterioration. And it's going to be defined as weakening, disintegrating, corroding, rust or decay, or to lose effectiveness of a structural system. The intent of the rule is to provide a means by which older parking structures or parking structures that may have potential accelerating deterioration conditions to be flagged specifically and to have a process in place where the local official can drive a maintenance program or repairs to correct or to mitigate disastrous failures of parking garage structures. We will be establishing a timeline for these structures if the rule gets promulgated by the department, and it will be applicable to parking garages. We'll say the first structural integrity evaluation would take place after a new structure has met its 10-year anniversary, or if an old structure greater than 10 years old right now, within 90 days of the adoption of that rule of the code. And like we said, we're putting it in a rule that is directed at local code enforcement, so it's going to require them to take a closer look at larger parking structures and to require them to keep records, and when deteriorating conditions become visible, relevant, noticed, that there is a mechanism to require a parking garage owner to get an evaluation formally by a design professional, a professional engineer, or someone qualified to do such an inspection, and to basically develop a report and to rate the structure. We currently have 3 rating values that we are proposing for the rule. The first criteria would be, is it safe? Is it capable of supporting the load that it's intended? Will the cars fall if they're loaded up in the garage? In unsafe condition, obviously the structural framing system is in jeopardy or in fear of being in jeopardy, thus triggering this process by which the owner would hire a professional, and evaluation would be done. There's a third criteria that is safe with a repair and a maintenance program. And I believe what that is meant to say is if there are conditions that would enhance or accelerate a structural failure, but they're not currently deeming the building to be unsafe, that those items would be flagged, would be addressed, and would be corrected. An example might be a surface drainage system. You know, roof decks, open parking garages are subject to the elements. There could be raining. The drainage facilities within the parking garage may fall into a state of disrepair, and that disrepair, the ponding that could exist within the parking garage, the freeze-thaw cycles that our climate experiences could easily begin to deteriorate the structural integrity of that parking garage system. And so what would happen is, in application, a code official could do the inspection. Now, like I said, there are rules for fire safety and property maintenance inspections. This inspection could be integral with that inspection, or if they chose, it could be a separate type of inspection that would be done. If something is identified, depending on its severity, it could be deemed unsafe. There are provisions in the fire code for placarding buildings. Code violations could certainly be issued. Summonses could be issued. Floors could be closed. It's a possibility for an unsafe structure. And again, there's sufficient language in the fire code today addressing unsafe buildings, as well as the property maintenance code. But if a condition exists, if the condition is flagged, the authority having jurisdiction would impose on the building owner to hire that design professional to create a remedy, to submit that remedy for a building permit, to have that remedy completed, the construction completed, and then the process would start back over. A reevaluation would happen 30 days after the completion of that remedy work. And so, like I said, in summary, it's an enhancement specifically targeted at parking garage structures, whether or not they are standalone or if they're integral to a building in a mixed-use occupancy situation.
So Brian, I don't want to do questions and discussion yet because I want to move to our legislators, but just very quickly, because I think you jumped over it. It's 10 years from the original date of construction, right?
Correct.
And then it's every 5 years thereafter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Or if it's already older than 10 years, then it's 90 days of adoption of the rule.
Correct. We would be, that was probably the most stringent part of the timeline, that if you have an old parking structure within 90 days of the implementation of this rule, the local jurisdictions would have to get that inspection completed.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
I'm now going to call on Member of Assembly Donald Lapardo and Senator Tom O'Mara to come up and give a quick presentation on the need for this. These legislators have a bill proposed on this topic, and so we're trying to get it done a little faster than maybe that.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to hear what Senator O'Mara and I have to say about this important subject. As you know from our testimony, which we won't read, but we'll just give you a quick overview. Parking garage collapsed in my assembly district in Johnson City. It's a hospital parking garage. Former county executive had walked out of that structure mere seconds after it collapsed. Upon investigation, my newspaper, also aware of other problems in my downtown and throughout Senator O'Mara's district, discovered that, as was mentioned, there are fire safety and property maintenance inspection requirements, but no structural, no requirements for the analysis of the structure and safety of the structure of these parking garages. So I called the Department of State. I was very pleased to speak with someone there who, in fact, verified this point, and immediately, as a stopgap measure, put in place a code training and came to Binghamton and put it out across the state for enhanced training for their code professionals, just so they can start to think about critical issues to do with structural maintenance. Senator Amar and I then drafted a bill and passed it in the same year we drafted it, with just one no vote in the Senate, near unanimous support for moving forward on this. As you know, the governor vetoed the measure, primarily because we hadn't run it by you, which is why we're here today, and fully support what the Department of State is proposing, because I think their suggested rule is exactly what the intent of our legislation was. Senator Amar, why don't you join me and we can...
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to the Codes Council for allowing us to be here to testify briefly today. As Donna said, we did pass legislation this year with only one no vote in the entire legislature. It was a recommendation of the governor's veto that this be presented to the Codes Council. We wish we'd known that a year ago. We would have been here before pushing through legislation. So we're here today to ask for your consideration of this proposed rule change. We have not seen the actual language of it, but as it was briefed to you, certainly sounds like what we're trying to get at with the legislation we proposed. I think the unanimous support in the legislature shows that other members across the state have similar concerns. I have had a parking garage in the same year that the one that Donna described in Johnson City, one in Ithaca that was no injuries involved, but structural failure. Also, probably trying to figure out when it was, probably close to 20 years ago, the parking garage in Elmira, a side slab of concrete fascia, I guess, fell onto the sidewalk. At one point, fortunately not hurting anyone, but we believe that a mere safety inspection is required under the code now isn't sufficient for these types of facilities and structures, and that something more should be being looked at, considering the great weight of the vehicles that go onto these structures day in and day out, and the potential for accidents of those vehicles that might impact the structure, and having things looked at after a significant accident of that type as well. Before, fortunately, we haven't had any personal injuries from any of these at this point. There has been some property damage with vehicles, so we've been fortunate. But I think it's time that this Codes Council take a good serious look at this and see if we can get some inspection process going, because clearly Johnson City or Ithaca are not the big urban centers of New York State. So if we're having problems with our small city parking garages, I got to believe it's an issue across the state where there are certainly much greater and larger structures than we have in our district. So we thank you for your time this morning and your consideration of this rule. And if there's any questions you have for us, we'd be happy to answer them.
I'd just like to add one thing. We were really honestly surprised that this rule did not already exist. And while many municipalities do this, there's no uniform approach across the state. People have been calling us from other states looking at this, looking to New York to provide leadership on this issue, because we really will be breaking ground in this area. And it's very important, as many of these structures are aging across our landscape. This will really be a very good gesture on behalf of public safety.
Are there any questions or comments? I see Mr. Sabatino pressing the button.
Yes. Just last week, we had a garage collapse, and this particular garage, there's one portion of it that is a double deck, and the other is the roof of the building below it. There was a Bobcat doing some work on the parking area itself, which is the roof of the lower structure. And there was a department store, or a small department store, a bargain type store there, and the Bobcat went through and injured 5 individuals. So I'm in full support of this, and I'm sure the Yonkers delegation would be in support of this up in Albany. My question is, what if it is a parking structure that is just the roof of a building? Is that included as part of this proposal?
Yeah. Right.
Hi, yes, in response to that question, the answer would be yes, that would be included in the scope of this rule.
Okay, thank you. So we're in need of this, and the sooner we can implement this, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Sabatino. Any other questions, comments from our legislators? Okay, hearing none. I will thank the Assemblywoman and the Senator for their leadership on this issue and their presentation today. We will share with you whatever regulation comes out of this, hopefully in the very near future.
Thank you very much.
Are there any technical questions for Brian? Mr. Hamlin?
Yes. In your presentation, under the exclusions.
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind exclusion number 3? What was the rationale? Just curious.
Typically, in code writing, there's usually some thresholds that are given. And a lot of times, requirements are triggered by area. And so we were just trying to come up with something that kind of to predict, any kind of comments that could come back that we could include. Basically, a very small garage. Honestly, I did some sketching and some math on it, and the best scenario I could get is you'd have really approximately 5 cars in that 2,500 area square foot, and would only be allowed if you were 1 level above ground, or if you were above the ground level by just 1. So, I mean, obviously, we're in the concept phases here.
Several underground parking garages where they don't go up, they have.
We could change that. We could
low grade.
Look at it closer to see if
you're live.
It's appropriate to say it's.
Yeah, my thought is to dismiss it. Okay. I was just thinking in my mind of how many cars, and my concern was even increased relative to safety if you're having a garage of this size and scope not falling under these regulations. So I see no reason to have an exception by the very nature of parking garages and open parking structures. It's quite apparent, or I understand the reason what was expressed by the senators.
Yeah. Comments greatly appreciated.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Bill Tyne in Buffalo.
Mr. Tyne.
I guess one of my concerns is again departing from the consistency with ICC. This is not a requirement, as I understand it, in any of the ICC codes. And I guess I recognize that the Northeast may be a different geographic area. There are provisions for climate zones within the code, but we have an area where a lot of road salt is used, and more caustic elements that can attack structural concrete and steel, and so there are issues with life cycle of these structures. But the general principle of the code, of course, is to build things that are structurally sound and in principle shouldn't need a lot of ongoing inspection. We don't require structural inspections on a regular ongoing basis with frequency in other structures. And so I guess my concern is the code properly written for the structures that we're building, number one, and so that we remain consistent with the rest of the ICC, or that we look into whether or not there needs to be some provision that has certainly from the ICC level, some sort of a climate zone issue that would recognize that we're in a different area and then provide justification for why things need to be different here. And then I guess the idea that we're going to eliminate some of these provisions that were looking towards smaller structures and the economic hardship that would go with that. I think you could tell from my earlier comments today. I think safety is extraordinarily important and paramount as a concern, but it does need to be weighed against cost. We're in a competitive situation here, and when people are building structures, that you recognize that particularly with smaller scale structures. I see the exemption for 1 and 2 family homes, but the concept I hope that people are always being cognizant of is that as cost rises, the number of people that are excluded from being able to qualify to buy things falls off exponentially. While it may be a constant increase, the number of people that can qualify are cut off and locked out. So the smaller garages, I don't know that this is a mortgage kind of a condition that we're worried about, that it's, we specifically exclude 1 and 2 family homes where that's a larger issue. But I do think we should be taking a hard look so we don't get into the law of unintended consequences as we depart from ICC.
Right.
Hopefully I'll be able to answer all of the comments and questions you've raised. I first just want to reiterate that the current minimum standards do require these type of buildings to be inspected today at a minimum of a 3-year frequency. Okay, I hope there's no question about that.
That is by the code enforcement officer.
That is as by the code enforcement officer. If those structures have also inherently also considered a dangerous occupancy, if they store large amounts of fuel or anything like that, they are also subject to an operating permit that is also contained in the minimum standards currently. So what we're trying to do is to draw a more specific attention to the public parking garages and to just make sure that we have a focus on that through the minimum standards. With regard to costs, yes, going through the rulemaking process, we'll definitely have to consider costs, and we're now kind of looking at, what type of economic questions to answer to do an effective cost analysis on this rule. With regard to putting it in the property maintenance code or the fire code or both, yes, we could certainly do that, and one of the things the department enjoys doing is bringing these type of proposals to the ICC level, and even though they might be a regional or a New York concern, we always are strong proponents of bringing those requirements to the ICC code development process and trying to push those type of requirements forward. Personally, about a decade ago, I unsuccessfully tried to bring special inspection qualifications to the ICC level. So I don't want to predict the type of debate that would be generated here, but we'll definitely use our experience from that time when we were proposing those type of changes. And yes, this is definitely something that we're also looking at putting language into the code itself. But we prefer to do it at the ICC level just as the overall direction, and think that, other states, other jurisdictions might follow our lead. Don't know if I've missed anything, sir. If there's anything else that needs to be clarified, I'd be happy to do it.
Mr. Tyne, anything else?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions, comments, discussion? Mr. Rusher?
Yes, I'm not a practicing structural engineer. I work with a lot of them that are. I can recollect in the last 15 years a structural parking garage collapse in Syracuse, one in Rochester. I'm sure there's more. The requirement for a registered design professional, primarily a structural engineer, because that's what we're talking about here, I think that's extremely important that we keep in this requirement. No different than you would go to a brain surgeon to have your foot operated on. You just get the structural people in there that know how these things stay up and see if there's an issue or not. So that's just a commentary. I think it's an excellent thing to have, because having it done by someone else that they think they know what's going on, and it looks like there's a difference between a registered structural or other professional engineer, architect than a technician that works underneath them. So I would urge us to keep with that requirement. I think it's a good idea.
Through the chair, just wanted to say agreed. And I don't know if I highlighted it when I spoke earlier, but we put in a criteria similar to what you find in Chapter 17 of the Building Code for special inspections, that the authority having jurisdiction has to approve that design professional. And to give you just a little commentary, if you're not familiar with Chapter 17, the authority having jurisdiction is the one approving the special inspector, and it's based on specific experience and relevant experience. So there is some pretty tight criteria that already exists in the code that we can certainly use in this going forward.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so from what I've heard and the shaking heads that I've seen, I think we are going to move forward. The department will move forward with a change to the Secretary's minimum standards. It will not come before the Code Council again because we're not amending the code itself. We will, however, also try and get this into the ICC's discussion for the, let's see, it'll be the 2018 code, right? All right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to the council members for weighing in. That was very helpful. And thank you, Assemblywoman Lepardo and Senator O'Mara. That takes us to agenda item 7. Please remember it, which is the public comment period. Gerard, if you would be so kind.
We have two gentlemen who would like to speak today. The first is Nick Carparelli. He'll be here in Albany, and he's from the New York State Concrete Masonry Association.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hathaway. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address the council today. As stated, my name is Nick Carparelli. I'm the director of the New York State Concrete Masonry Association. Our organization represents concrete block producers and manufacturers of architectural masonry specialty products, and all of our members are located within the state of New York. Our association is primarily a technical group, and our main mission is to provide education and technical assistance to architects, engineers, builders and contractors, and code officials with respect to design and construction of masonry structures. I'm also a fairly regular attendee of the meetings of the Code Council, and therefore I am keenly aware of the council and staff's goal to minimize or eliminate New Yorkisms or unique amendments found in the New York State Supplement. Therefore, I want to assure the council that what I'm about to talk about this morning is not unique to New York State and thus not a New Yorkism. Rather, I'm simply asking for language that has historically appeared within the International Code, but is absent from the 2015 iteration, simply to be reinstated to the supplement. Now, the language I'm seeking to restore pertains to Masonry Chapter 21 under Section 2105, Quality Assurance, specifically 2105.2, Acceptance Relative to Strength Requirements. First, let me give you some background to put this into context. There are two methods for determining the strength of the finished masonry assembly. The prism test method, where small assemblies are actually built using the masonry units and the type of mortar specified for the project, then compressed until failure. Or the unit strength method, where the strength is determined from the table found within the reference document for the code, known as TMS 602, ACI 530, ASCE 6, which I will refer to as TMS 602 for brevity going forward, the building code requirements and specifications for masonry structures. And also that language has historically appeared within the code itself. Now, the strength of the masonry assembly is the value the structural engineer needs and requires to determine the amount and placement of internal reinforcement of the masonry structure. Of the two, the unit strength method is the more economical choice and therefore the method selected most often. However, previous versions of the unit strength table tended to provide very conservative values for the strength of masonry assemblies, resulting in over-design of masonry structures and often unnecessarily adding additional expense for more reinforcement than actually required. Beginning in 2011, TMS, the Masonry Society, and the National Concrete Masonry Association, NCMA, began conducting tests in the NCMA labs in Herndon, Virginia, of several prism assemblies of various strength masonry units sourced from producers throughout the country. The goal was to determine whether some of the conservatism found in the unit strength tables could be reduced or even eliminated, and to revise the table so that the values more closely represented actual strengths as determined by the PRISM test. Upon conclusion of the test, it was found that higher masonry assembly strengths could indeed be consistently achieved using lower strength masonry units than specified in the existing table. This effectively increased masonry assembly strength while simultaneously reducing costs. The table in the 2013 version of TMS 602 was revised to reflect the findings of the test, thus providing greater efficiency through the elimination of unnecessary reinforcement. The 2013 TMS 602 then became a reference document for the 2015 I code. However, while the unit strength table historically appeared in the code, as of 2015, the table and the language associated with it are no longer part of the text. They are now deemed to be included by reference to TMS 602. Therefore, absent a copy of the reference document, an architect, engineer, contractor, or code official might not be aware that the table has been revised, and a given structure may be designed and constructed to the previous standard, resulting in unnecessary additional expense. Now, I've provided a copy of the historic language with the new table from TMS 602 to the Department of State staff, and I'm respectfully requesting that the text and the table be included in the next iteration of the New York State supplement, so that the significant change is more readily visible to all concerned regarding design, construction, and inspection of masonry construction. Failing that, I would ask that a technical bulletin be created to announce the revision to TMS 602. New York State Concrete Masonry Association also intends to partner with the National Concrete Masonry Association to propose the language and the table be restored to the next iteration of the International Code. To reiterate, I want to be clear that I'm not seeking an amendment to the IBC, nor am I requesting any modification to the code that will be unique to the Empire State. Rather, I'm simply asking that the language that has historically been included in the code be made readily visible again. Again, I wish to thank the members of the Council and Department of State staff today for the opportunity to address the code and Code Council. And if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer them right now or at any time that is convenient.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Ed Osan, NRDC in New York City office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the council. I will just briefly express appreciation for the thoughtful consideration and favorable action on the 2017 supplement, including the important provisions for water efficiency. Thank you for your attention to this issue.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Does that conclude public comments?
Yes.
It does. Okay, excellent. Agenda item 8, future meetings. The next scheduled meeting of the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code Council is set for June 14th, 2017. I know that's a long way. We moved this one up. So the Sugar House was live for this season. The next one after that is September 27th, 2017, and then the last one of the year, the fourth quarter, will be November 8th, 2017. Those are all Wednesdays. Right?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Bill Tyne in Buffalo. I know it's herding cats and I'm only one person, but I do have meetings out of state in Washington that week of June 14th. So I don't know if there's, sounds like you moved that meeting up and I didn't have a conflict when it was moved up, but now I will.
Okay. We'll see what we can do with the members as we get closer to the meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Is there any other comments? Okay. Is there any other business before the council today? Hearing none. I'd like to thank the council for their work. Busy beginning of the year. Look forward to the next meeting with all of you. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Mr. Flanagan makes a motion to adjourn, seconded by Mr. Lucchese. We are adjourned.